Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again on our recovery video series. My name is Scott, and we have Nathan with us once again. Hi, Nathan.
Hey.
And we are taking a look today at section 4 of Brené Brown's book, which is called Dare to Lead. Subtitle, by the way, Brave Work, Tough Conversations, and Whole Hearts. We both have enjoyed the book. We highly recommend it to you, and we're just working through one section or one chapter at a time, hoping to whet your appetite enough that you might pick up the book and read it for yourself. Also, we started this series. Nathan said, why don't we create a video series for people in particular who may not come to a recovery meeting? And we understand you might feel uncomfortable about that. And so maybe you'll just listen to this. And I think that would be outstanding because we're talking about a lot of the same concepts here, though in a different format. Obviously, on Monday nights, we see it through the lens of Celebrate Recovery. But when you're ready to make that step, we'd love to have you, and we will welcome you. Monday night, 7 o'clock, Christ Community Church, Westchester, Pennsylvania. All right. With that introduction, as I said, we're looking at section 4 on shame and empathy. And the first thing I want to say, for those of you who have hung in there and watched most, if not all, of our recovery videos, you might recognize that shame and empathy keep coming up. It's fascinating. It's being talked about in many places, certainly in many books that the two of us are reading. And we were just noting before we started the video that in the first book we did, Kurt Thompson's Soul of Shame, and then the other half of Church, and then what we're doing now, Dare to Lead. Shame has been in all three of those, shame and empathy. And generally we think of shame in a negative sense. It does stand out to me that in the book, The Other Half of Church, the author said, while they recognize it certainly in a negative sense, they do recognize that somebody who hears something, perhaps a mistake they have made, let's keep it simple, and they hear that and they use that in a convicting or motivating kind of sense to change, those authors from The Other Half of Church would say, in that sense, it could be used positively. But in general, guilt is when I feel like I did something bad. Shame is when I have the conviction I am inherently bad. I mean, even just saying those words, right? That's heavy.
Yeah. And Brené actually says, I mean, directly, people believe that they deserve their shame. So if someone says, "Oh man, I'm such a failure," or "I'm a loser," they're in some ways frustrated, but they also really believe that it's part of themselves. I just visited actually a house for recovering young men, and he said, many of them have a worthiness issue. Really, like they don't have the strengths, the capabilities to survive, or in his words, to launch well, meaning kind of in some ways launch their life well.
Yes.
But I want to read off this list of things because, she is a shame researcher, and she isn't just talking about some emotional thing. She is talking about very much practices that stem, in her opinion, from shame itself. And she says shame is hidden behind the walls of organizations. And I want you to hear the list because I think every one of us can probably relate to at least some of these. Because she is saying that the foundation of these is shame. So perfectionism, favoritism, gossiping, back-channeling, comparison, self-worth tied to productivity, harassment, discrimination, power over, bullying, blaming, teasing, or cover-ups. I mean, I can't imagine anyone not relating to some of those. And she says that is what eats away at trust, connection, innovation. I mean, the list goes on. And I just think that makes, in some ways, like Kurt Thompson has said, shame is like enemy number one. It's the piece, the element that stays hidden and undercover, and also the most damaging from the inside out. So,
yeah, and we talk about at Celebrate Recovery the kind of the circle of addiction, if you will, and it's basically I make a mistake or something happens to me, and I feel bad about what I've done, and then I medicate in order to hide that pain and to press it down, and really to keep others from seeing what I think is the worst part of me. And quite honestly, because I believe if you see this in me, you won't like me. Or if you see this in me, if you see who I really am, you will hate me, or you will despise me, or you will shame me. And so I come up with a mask. And it could be one of the ones that Nathan just mentioned, like perfectionism. If I do I may not say this ever out loud. And it's almost like I feel this. It's almost going back to our previous book on the other half of church. I feel this. It may not even be putting words to it, but the feeling is I have to do everything perfect, because if I fail, you will see into my soul.
Yeah. And you won't like what you see.
And you won't like what you see.
Yeah.
And so I choose a mask, and when that mask fails, let's say perfectionism fails, I may throw myself into an addiction. Let's say alcohol, for example.
Yeah.
Because alcohol will medicate. It feels like it's medicating the pain. And maybe for a moment it is, but then coming out of that, I feel even more shame, which leads me to feel worse about myself, which leads me to put on a heavier mask, which leads me to medicate. And you can see how this cycle of addiction rolls on until somebody steps in and says, hey, listen, you don't have to continue on that treadmill. Why don't you just start by confessing that you have an issue?
I think in that way it becomes most clear that those addictions are really the antithesis of life itself. You're numbing to escape. You're taking the drugs, or you're wanting the high from whichever habit you have to escape from reality, which means you're in that small way or large way, you're not wanting to live. You know, you're wanting to be somewhere else. Anyway.
Or be someone else. Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of the last section that we just went through, when she went through the list of armored leadership versus daring. The last one on the list is leading from hurt, which in her, the way she uses it, and different authors will relate to this differently, but she says leading from hurt, which would be I've been hurt, and we all have, and therefore I wear a mask, versus leading from heart.
Yeah.
And leading from heart would be, listen, I don't have it all together, and I've made a boatload of mistakes. And so I'm going to lead from that position as a fellow human being who doesn't have it all together. Now, which person would you rather be led under?
Yeah. And she says the way to overcome shame, the antidote is empathy. That's the connection that she's making. Someone who's not using their hurt to weaponize or to throw it around or to grab power with, but to actually use empathy to really connect in an integrative way with people. So
yeah, and there are two sides of that, right? There are empathy with people, but I can only really empathize with you if I have empathized in a sense with myself. which from a biblical
Yeah.
point of view would be, well, I've made a mistake and I've gone to God to ask
Yes.
for his forgiveness, and perhaps to another person and ask for their forgiveness. But I can't have true empathy towards somebody else unless it's a mask in which I'm trying to act like I care about everybody in the world to cover up my own pain. But it's maybe a mask. So I have to have some kind of empathy toward myself. And that would only come from realizing that there is a God. His name is Jesus. He died in my place. He loves me. He's forgiven me. I mean, he has empathy toward me. So then I can have legitimate empathy toward others.
So she lists some basic empathy skills. I thought they were really, simple, but, obviously simple doesn't necessarily mean easy. Because number one was to see the world as others see it, or perspective taking, meaning allowing yourself to learn other people's perspective as a way to kind of stepping into their world as they see it. I think that some of these things is really about relating to someone in such a way that they're feeling not the us versus them, but you're standing side by side with me. It'd almost be the picture of you're sitting at the same table, looking out over the same scenery, and you're seeing things together, not just you off in a corner.
And Nathan, on that point, I've often said with the various kinds of care ministry at Christ Community, I've described it as sitting around a table, whether it's divorce care, grief share, celebrate recovery, the Conquer series with sexual addiction, sitting around a table. And people may not actually say this, but the idea is when you hear somebody else tell their story, the message is basically, I know what that's like. I've been there too. And I think those are some of the most freeing words you could ever hear another person say.
Mm-hmm. And I think her skill is number two is to be non-judgmental. But I think when you hear someone's authentic story, I think it's always the opposite of what we mentally think is going to happen, which is, oh, I'm going to be shamed. And really the opposite is that is a shared emotional experience. I can relate to that. In fact, she even goes on to say in a part of the chapter, there was a conference and 40 people from 40 different countries were coming, and they were sharing stories, and people realized, wow, we have different cultures from different places, but these shared experiences about fear and shame versus empathy and connection are all, I think she even said, universal. I mean, people are very much able to relate to those stories. So
it reminds me also of in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he says, comfort others with the comfort that God has given you. Well, in order to do that, I have to have enough empathy where I realize I've been forgiven and God has done some work in my life, and I want you to experience the same thing. That's the opposite of I feel horrible about myself and I want to beat you down in some way, though I may never say that to you. It could be perfectionism. It could be competition. It could be always winning. I want to emotionally beat you down in some way that I always feel somewhat good about myself because I've emotionally beat you up.
Right. So just to end off the skills that she talks about, it's understanding someone else's feelings, communicating your understanding of that person's feelings. And then the last one is mindfulness, which is really just about paying attention. You're being present to someone.
Yep. Okay. And that will take us up to section 5, which we will do next time. And that one is on curiosity and grounded confidence. Self-awareness and self-love matter is what we'll learn about in that one. In fact, our key statement is who we are is how we lead. Who we are is how we lead. So that will be section 5, which we hope you will join us for next time.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you.